I don't think anybody has a perfect path where everything has gone well for them and everything's gone according to plan. I just like to tell students so they don't think when you see my CV or you see any faculty member's CV, it just it looks so fancy. There's all these things that you've done, and it doesn't have all the things that I tried and didn't go that well. And so I feel like it's important to make sure folks know that side of the story too.
Welcome to the Open Notes podcast. Our study group includes me, Nora Mortimer, Kiana Gerhardt,
Hello.
and Angela Thompson.
Hello.
Our guest today is Michelle Edwards, researcher and educator in environmental sociology and risk perceptions. Grab a snack in your notebook. Let's get ready to study. So, first off, Michelle, can you introduce yourself? What do you do? What do you see yourself as?
Hi, my name is Michelle Edwards, and I'm an associate professor of sociology at Texas State University. And just like they mentioned, my specialty is in environmental sociology. I also do some work in sociology of science, so like risk perceptions, and I do a lot of work with different kinds of research methods. I originally grew up in South Texas in the Rio Grande Valley, and I've been in a number of different places, including previously at Texas Christian University. I also have been an undergraduate student at Rice University and a graduate student at Texas State and at Washington State University.
How did growing up in South Texas affect who you became as a researcher?
That's an excellent question. I really loved growing up in the Rio Grande Valley, and I grew up. So there's a couple of things about my childhood that I think have helped to shape who I am. One of the probably most prominent things is I grew up, my dad was a professor at the university. It was UT Pan Am, and now it's UT Rio Grande Valley. And so he was a professor, and I always thought this seemed like the coolest job ever, because you get to work with students and you get to be on a college campus and you get to kind of work from home sometimes. And so even from a young age, I think I grew up thinking about academia in ways that many folks don't have the opportunity to really envision that as a potential career. Also, growing up in the Valley, I think has shaped my views on environmental issues because the ecosystem in the Valley is so special and so unique. And my family was always really passionate about environmental issues and conservation. We grew up doing a lot of stuff outside. And so even from a young age, I was concerned about the environment and really had kind of some interests, especially in environmental injustices. So we saw a lot growing up in the Valley of environmental inequalities and people thinking about the Valley sometimes as a place that can be degraded because of the kinds of folks that live there. And then probably the third thing that I experienced growing up in the Valley, I had really great teachers. And even though it's an area that is very low income, I just remember school being so fun and just being so inspired by the teachers that I had growing up. And so I think that has also, I went from there to Rice, which was a pretty big transition for me growing up in the Valley and then going off to this fancy private school with a bunch of students who had far more opportunities than I did growing up. But at the same time, I felt like I was really prepared and had a lot of insights, I would say, that some of my other students didn't have growing up in a place like the Valley. So when I went to college, one of the first classes that I took that I was really interested in was a race and ethnic relations class. And growing up in the Valley, I thought, oh, I know everything there is to know about race and ethnicity. Only I did not. And especially as a white person growing up in the Valley, which is largely Latino, it really opened my eyes to different perspectives that I didn't have. And I thought it was such a powerful course and it was so fascinating. And there were so many different races and ethnicities, students of different racial and ethnic backgrounds in the course. We actually I remember one assignment, we had to go to the Galleria, which is this fancy shopping center in Houston. And we were paired up with a student who is different race or ethnicity than ourselves. And we would wear the same kind of outfit and go into different stores and watch each other to see how the clerks treated us and whether they followed us around, whether they helped us, that kind of thing. And it was just such a fascinating course. I thought, oh my gosh, I love this. I love sociology. And so that really turned me on to the field and led the way for the rest of my career.
It's always amazing to me the number of people I speak to who are in academia in some way. And if you hear about their background, at some point in time, they really had great teachers and they really loved learning. I'm always amazed when you hear somebody, oh, hated school. I'm like, how could you hate it? It was great.
Yeah.
And it's just people come from very different places with education.
Yes.
Did you do your undergrad and post or graduate like back to back, or did you take breaks in between?
Yeah, so when I finished my undergrad degree, I wanted to go and save the world, that sort of idea. And I joined the Peace Corps and moved to Benin in West Africa as an environmental action volunteer. And I didn't really have any idea what I was going to be doing. I had very little, I had taken one semester of French. And that's actually how I ended up in West Africa was that they said you could potentially have a better chance of getting selected for the Peace Corps if you take French. And so I was like, okay. So I knew basically how to say, hi, my name's Michelle, and not much more. And flew very far away at a time when there was very little cell reception. I think that was when I got my first cell phone and just tried something totally different. And it was a challenging experience, I think in ways that I wasn't expecting. So I knew that I wasn't going to have the same kinds of comforts that I have in the US. And that for me wasn't the big challenge. The big challenge was not feeling like, especially so the first part of the Peace Corps, you have, or at least when I did it, you had this training period, and that was just so wonderful. You live with a host family, and it was basically like school all over again. And I love school, so for me that was amazing. But then we transitioned into working, and you're supposed to be working on a somewhat sustainable project that can last. Like you're working with a local counterpart, and it's supposed to last beyond when you leave. And I just kept facing challenges with not really feeling like we were getting going, not really feeling like we were doing anything. And some of the expectations that we had in the Peace Corps, things like you need to like wear the local outfits, speak the local language, eat the local food, do all these things so that you can be perceived as a local person. It just wasn't working. Like nobody was seeing me as a local person. I was still this white lady from the US, and I just was so frustrated. And it really wasn't until after I came back to the US that I realized some of the things that were missing from the Peace Corps, at least my experience, was a lack of real structural understanding of what was happening in this place. So, for example, we didn't talk at all about colonialism. We didn't talk at all about like these larger structural factors that were affecting local environmental and social problems. And so I just didn't really have the understanding at that time to know why things were not working the way that I thought that they should. And so after almost a year, I left and came back to the US and was just really, that was like my first time quitting something. And I felt just so disappointed in myself and didn't really know what to do next. I knew I had liked Austin. I had visited before. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to move to Austin. I got a job as a preschool teacher because I like kids and just used that as a period to kind of like figure the next plan out. And so I did that for a while. I ended up also working at a garden shop, which was probably the most relaxing job I've had, just watering and selling plants. And then I got excited about school again. Like I was ready to go back. I wanted to be in an academic setting with other folks who were passionate about learning. And so I applied to graduate programs, a couple of graduate programs. And I didn't really, at that time, I didn't really know anything about the process of applying to graduate programs or how to pick one. I looked at the list of which were the top ranked programs and I applied, I think, to three of them. And I didn't get into any of them. And so it was, for me, it was just, again, really, wait, what am I doing wrong? Here are these things that I want to do, but it's not going well. And so I pivoted and I drove down to Texas State and was looking at local institutions that had later deadlines. And I got to Texas State and all I had heard about it before was that it was like a party school. And I didn't know very much about the program, and I met with some of the faculty there. And again, it just clicked. It was like, oh my gosh, these are incredible people who are, again, just like Angela said, really passionate about learning, who love school, who love teaching. And I was very fortunate to get into Texas State for my master's degree and just had really amazing experiences as a master's student. And it was there that I had gotten a little bit jaded on environmental issues when I was in the Peace Corps and the capacity to work on these issues. I ended up working with Chad Smith, who's now one of my colleagues. And again, it just re-excited me about environmental issues. And so when I was deciding on a PhD program, I decided to apply to Washington State University, which at the time was just known as one of the strongest environmental programs, and was able to go there and continue my studies. So for the most part, to answer your question very long, for the most part, I had a continuous-ish path, but definitely with some bumps in between. And I think that's very normal. I don't think anybody has a perfect path where everything has gone well for them and everything's gone according to plan. I just like to tell students so they don't think when you see my CV or you see any faculty member's CV, it just it looks so fancy. There's all these things that you've done, and it doesn't have all the things that I tried and didn't go that well. And so I feel like it's important to make sure folks know that side of the story too.
Wonderful, because I am just looking at master's programs to go back. So good to hear that, and I'll internalize all of that good wisdom of, hey, it might not, you know. So talking about like your master's in Texas and then your doctorate in Washington, how did those differ? Was it like the states themselves and their education system differed, or was it just the programs that you were in that differed?
The programs were different in the sense that Texas State has a terminal master's program in the Department of Sociology. So there are students that are in our master's program who are planning to go on to a PhD program, but there are even more students in our program who are going for a master's degree, maybe while they work full time, maybe while they're like, this is maybe for helping them to get ahead in their career rather than, oh, they're going to be going into academia and that's why they're pursuing this. With Washington State University, especially for the PhD program, they only accept a small number of students into the program. And so that's really your cohort and again, maybe this was just my romanticized experience. It's like you do everything together, you're best friends, you hang out, you study, you do all these activities. And so I, and actually, I did have that at Texas State too. I had a small cohort of students that we all had graduate teaching assistantships, and those became my friends. But I think that that's especially for folks who are listening. I think that sometimes with PhD programs, you definitely have more of that cohort, that sense of this is your community. Whereas not all master's programs have that same experience because you're working with students who have totally different lives and are on campus at different times. And it just isn't quite that same experience. The thing that was different about Texas State and Washington State that I'll say one thing that was similar. I was going to say the different thing was the climate, and that for me was a huge thing. I grew up in a very warm place, and so Washington State was by my standards so cold and drizzly all the time. I didn't realize how big of a challenge that would be for me personally. And so I would strongly recommend if you are going to move somewhere that is colder, investing in the right clothing. I did not realize until we were about to leave. It was like, oh, people feel warmer when they have the right jacket and good boots. And so finding thrift stores in Washington State where we could find some of the right clothing definitely made the experience better. But that was hard in ways that I wasn't expecting. One thing that was similar was the culture of Eastern Washington and then rural Texas. There's a lot of parallels there. And it was interesting at the time when we moved up, there were a lot of folks that were like, oh, you're from Texas. And they had all these kind of stereotypes about Texas they were expecting. And we went up to Washington State with a lot of stereotypes about what Washington folks would be like. But that was really Western Washington folks. Eastern Washington is rural farmlands, very politically conservative in general, very white. I had not realized how homogenous the community would be in terms of race and ethnicity until I got up there. And so there were definitely some kind of similarities between rural Texas and rural Washington that I wasn't expecting. So we were prepared in some ways for that part.
I live in Washington right now, and
What?
yeah, and I am from New Mexico, which is a minority
Yeah.
majority state, and I have the exact same experience as you, where in New Mexico minorities are the majority, where Hispanic Latinos, there's so many, and
Mhm.
it's just so diverse in that aspect. And then when I
Mhm.
went to Washington, like you said, the weather was awful. It's always raining. It's raining right now. It's always cold, and I for sure have heard like the Seattle blues. So these people are not nice to you because it's always dreary outside. So we don't have time for you. And how many people I didn't realize were they have this like they come from Russia, and
Oh,
there's a lot of them. Maybe it's just where I am since I'm by the Canadian border, but
yeah.
it's just so diverse in such a different way, if that makes sense. Where they are like European descent, so there's a lot of Italians, there's a lot of Russians, or there's a lot of like Mediterranean that I've never had experiences with in such quantity, if that makes sense, as opposed to
Definitely.
like New Mexico. So it's very interesting being here.
Yeah, where I was, there were a lot of folks from the Latter-day Saints church. So that was for me, it was like I had maybe met one or two people who identified as Mormon growing up. And then all of a sudden in Washington state, there are all a lot of people that I was meeting. And so just like you're saying, like being in a slightly different part of the US, you get introduced to a whole new set of like diversity, but in a different way, like a whole new group of folks that I just hadn't met or had very many experiences with. And sometimes that can be challenging if you're like trying to understand, like you were talking about people being somewhat cold. That was the same thing when we were walking down the road. We'd be like, hi, hello, and people would be like, do I know you? Like, why are you talking to me? And I was like, I just said hi because I'm a Texan, I don't know. But trying to understand how to interact with folks that were very different, I think was is definitely a useful skill. Especially as sociologists, we understand culture and how that affects norms and so on.
That actually raises a really interesting thought for me because I was born in Texas, but we lived in Boston for a while. And that's often the feeling people have about Bostonians is people are cold and very distant and yeah, not everybody in the South is warm and lovely, but there at least is a a pretense of being nice and cordial and interactive. Nora, I know you were from Chicago. Is it the same?
It is absolutely the same that Chicagoans are rude and, don't talk to me on the street, or don't wave at me or even look at me. So when I moved to Texas, it was like, oh, and I'm already pretty introverted and then don't like to talk to people, but I was like, oh, all of these, like, no, 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 please don't. So, like, I would say the Midwestern suburbs are definitely different than what Chicago is as well. So it just really depends on each different part of the country is so interesting to see their mannerisms. But yeah, I feel like we could talk about that all day, but it's cool that you had that experience and kind of like a culture shock. Was there a reverse culture shock when you moved back to Texas?
Let's see. So when I moved back to Texas, we moved to Fort Worth. And I think that I think that was different in the sense that being at TCU was the first time I'd ever worked with students who were, and not all students at TCU were this way, but there were many students at TCU that were very wealthy or had very wealthy backgrounds. And I remember teaching one of my first classes, and a student was talking about their private jet or the private jet that they'd been on. And I just, in my head, I thought, wow, this is so different. Because up until that point, I had only, like at Texas State and at Washington State, growing up in the Valley, I had only really taught with folks who were coming from less privileged backgrounds. And so for me, that was a change. Not necessarily that all of Fort Worth was like that, but working at TCU, that was definitely a big change in trying to understand the experiences that other students had and how I could connect my background or my experiences with them when we did have such diversity. And there's, I think, other parts environmentally, Washington State. So I will give one shout out to Washington State. Having lived in Texas all my life, moving to Washington State, it was incredible how many just awesome trips we could take to Oregon coast, to Montana, to like various areas in that vicinity that were beautiful and different. And then we get back to Texas and it's okay, let's go to this place. Oh, it's only 10 hours away or 8 hours away. I had forgotten a little bit how long it took to get places, to get somewhere different. And so for me, that still is a challenge that I think about when we're here in Texas. Okay, we want to go visit somewhere different. We're going to be in the car for a while. And just the kind of hugeness of our state, I think is something that I don't know if I'll ever get used to.
It's really hard to explain that to people who aren't in the state. My husband, and so we're in the Fort Worth area, and the company he works for is in upstate New York, and they were assigning him because he does home inspections, do an inspection. I think it was El Paso. It's okay, just run over there, do the inspection. And he's no,
Oh my
I
gosh.
can't run over to El Paso. People don't have a concept of how massive Texas really
Right.
is. In terms of your research background, and that you've had a variety of topics, you mentioned environmental issues, but also gender roles, etc. What do you feel has been some of the most important research that's been done in the last decade?
Boy, that's such an interesting question. So you're not specifically just talking about my research, just any research in general.
Correct.
Okay. I am biased though, of course, because I am an environmental sociologist. And so for me, I think some of the most interesting work that I have read has been looking at environmental inequalities. I think that work, again, it goes back decades, but we didn't really see in terms of our subfield, we didn't really see as much of a expansion of this idea of environmental inequalities until much more recently. For example, thinking about environmental racism, thinking about indigenous experiences, thinking about settler colonialism, thinking about all the kind of varied ways in which people experience environmental inequalities, thinking about the global south. I just feel like our field, which is a somewhat youngish field. It only has been around since the 1960s, 1970s. And for a long time, it was really focused on political economy, the Marxist stuff, the critiques of capitalism, which are still part of it. But I just have been so fascinated by the ways in which the field has really expanded that idea of thinking about environmental inequalities beyond just race and class in the US to global issues like settler colonialism, this idea that this process that continues looking at experiences of all sorts of different folks. I've found that research personally to be most fascinating. So some of the ways that folks who are you know having tenure or tenure track positions take is that they have a niche and they just really hone in on this one topic area that they study a lot of stuff over time on that same area. I have taken a completely different approach, which is anytime I have an idea, I follow that thread a little while and then study it a little bit and then I follow a different thread and so my work is all over the place, just like you mentioned. And actually to me that kind of keeps it interesting because I don't get bored on a single topic over a long period of time.